56 days, 39 children, 7 teachers, and a story the government let the whole country believe for a month. Because here is what nobody is asking today. While every headline in Nigeria says the same thing: freed, rescued, relief. The woman at the center of this, the school principal who survived all 56 days in that forest, she is on record from inside captivity saying the 1 billion naira ransom story wasn't true. Not unconfirmed, not alleged. She said it herself on video weeks before her release. These claims are not true. So if the ransom demand wasn't real, who built that story? Who benefited from Nigerians believing kidnappers wanted 1 billion naira? And what does it mean that the government never corrected it? Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Inside Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. Let's establish exactly what happened, because the timeline matters more than usual here. On May 15, 2026, armed men, dozens of them, some dressed in military fatigue moving on motorcycles, attacked 3 schools simultaneously in Orire local government area of Oyo State, Community Grammar School and Baptist Nursery and Primary School in Ahoro Isiele and LA Primary School in Yawata. No fewer than 39 pupils and 7 teachers, including a school principal, were taken. During the attack itself, a teacher, Joel Adesian, was killed while attempting to escape. Days later, the abductors released a video showing the killing of another teacher, Michael Oyedokun, reportedly beheaded in the kidnappers' den. The group responsible has been linked, according to multiple security source reports, to Ansaru, a breakaway faction of Boko Haram, historically active along Nigeria's border corridor towards the Niger Republic. Within weeks, a 4-point demand was widely reported: release of 2 detained Ansaru commanders, Mahmoud Usman and his deputy Abubakar, plus a 1 billion naira ransom, 2 Hilux vehicles, and implementation of Sharia-related law. Here's where the story splits. On May 8th, a full month before release, Principal Rachael Alamu appeared in a video recorded from inside captivity and directly disputed that reporting. She said in her own words that the abductors were not demanding money, were not demanding Sharia law, and had not pressured captives religiously. The only demand, she said, was the release of the detained commanders. That's not a minor correction. That's the central figure in this story, speaking from the one position with the most at stake, contradicting the narrative that dominated national coverage for a month. 56 days after the attack, on Friday, presidential spokesman Bayo Onanuga announced on X, finally, all the kidnapped pupils and teachers in Orire, Oyo State, have been rescued by our security agencies. Governor Seyi Makinde expressed relief: the victims are home. But the contradiction Principal Alamu raised in June was never resolved before that announcement, and it still hasn't been. 3 institutional actors sit at the center of this: the Oyo State government, the Presidency through the Office of the Special Advisor on Information and Strategy, and the security architecture, DSS, police, and the military under Defense Minister Christopher Musa. Oyo's position was consistent throughout. Commissioner of Information Dotun Oyelade repeatedly stated the government would not pay ransom, and separately declined to disclose details of negotiations, calling it unhelpful to reveal strategy while efforts continued. That's a defensible operational position, but it also means for 56 days, the state government controlled what the public did and didn't know, with no independent verification mechanism. The presidency's role became active only near the end. Onanuga's statement confirming the rescue was followed by a second claim that 8 suspected kidnappers were arrested and taken into DSS custody, with others neutralized. Here's the institutional tension worth naming plainly. No quid pro quo is a claim about intent, not a verifiable fact. The kingpin remaining in custody demonstrates that particular demand wasn't met. It does not, on its own, establish that no ransom was paid, since ransom and prisoner release were reported as separate, distinct demands from the start. Defense Minister Musa's July 8-9 disclosure adds another layer. He confirmed the kidnappers had threatened to kill the captives if security forces attempted a forceful rescue, which is precisely why this took 56 days rather than a rapid tactical operation. That's a credible operational explanation for the timeline. What it does not explain is why the ransom and Sharia claims were never institutionally corrected, even after the principal, who is meant to be the story's protagonist, said publicly from captivity that they were false. Has this institutional apparatus functioned as designed? Partially. The security operation appears to have succeeded without loss of hostage life in the final days. But the information function, the part of governance responsible for giving citizens an accurate account of a 56-day national crisis, left a documented contradiction unaddressed. That's not a conspiracy claim, it's a verifiable gap in institutional follow-through.
Let's talk about who gains from each version of this story. Because the ransom narrative and the no ransom narrative serve very different interests. If the 1 billion naira ransom story is true, then the eventual resolution raises an uncomfortable question. Did the state, directly or indirectly, pay terrorists, something the Oyo government explicitly said it would never do? That version is a liability for both Abuja and Ibadan. If the ransom story is false, as Principal Alamu stated, the resolution becomes a cleaner win, a pure security operation, no negotiation with terrorism, no naira changing hands. That version is significantly better for the presidency's narrative, for Tinubu's security credibility heading toward 2027, and for Governor Makinde, who has faced sustained pressure, including a month-long Nigerian Union of Teachers strike and public campaigns from figures like Very Dark Man over the state's handling of the crisis. So, who had an incentive to let the ransom story stand unrefuted for a month, even after the principal disputed it from inside captivity? Arguably, both the kidnappers, who benefit from an inflated, fear-generating public narrative that pressures government toward concessions, and, separately, anyone in government who preferred ambiguity over a definitive answer while negotiations were fragile. This also lands inside the broader 2027 positioning conversation you've been tracking on this channel. Security competence is becoming a central plank for Tinubu's case for his second term, particularly as ACP works through its own internal tensions and the opposition's Obi, Atiku, El-Rufai dynamics continue to shift. A clean, no ransom, no negotiation resolution to a high-profile school kidnapping is a politically valuable data point, which is exactly why it deserves scrutiny rather than automatic acceptance. Who's conspicuously quiet here? The 2 detained Ansaru commanders' legal status, still on trial, hasn't been revisited publicly since the release. If their prosecution proceeds normally, that supports no quid pro quo. If it quietly stalls in the months ahead, that would tell a very different story. Beyond the immediate politics, this case sits inside a pattern that matters to every Nigerian, regardless of region. Security implications first. Whether or not ransom was paid materially affects the incentive structure for every armed group watching this outcome. If groups believe mass school abductions reliably produce ransom or prisoner concessions, the pattern will repeat, as it already has repeatedly across the northwest and now increasingly into the north-central corridor bordering Oyo State. If the resolution genuinely involved no concessions, that's a more discouraging signal to future actors, but only if the public actually believes it, which requires the information gap we've discussed to be closed. Economically, prolonged security crises in agricultural and semi-rural corridors like Orire depress local investment and deepen the poverty Nigerians in these communities already disproportionately carry. 56 days of paralysis in 3 schools means 56 days of lost instructional time for children already among the most vulnerable to interrupted education nationally, a cost that doesn't make headlines but compounds for years. For ordinary Nigerians, the people furthest from power in this story, the practical question is simpler than the political one. Can a parent trust that sending a child to a rural school is safe? And can they trust that if the worst happens, the government will tell them the truth about how it was resolved? Right now, on this second question, the honest answer is not fully, not yet. This case connects to a pattern West Africa watchers and the diaspora need to track. Ansaru's continued capacity to conduct coordinated multi-site school abductions even after years of Nigerian and regional counter-terrorism operations signals that the group retains operational depth along the Niger border corridor, an area ECOWAS security cooperation frameworks have repeatedly flagged as a soft zone. For the diaspora, in the UK, US, Canada, and South Africa, the relevant takeaway is this. International headlines will report the rescue as a clean success story, largely because that's the version the Presidency's statement supports, and it's the simplest to syndicate. The nuance, the unresolved ransom contradiction, is unlikely to travel internationally unless Nigerian analysis surfaces it directly. That's part of why this channel exists. This also sits inside the broader global pattern of governments managing information around hostage negotiations, a familiar dynamic from similar crises in the Sahel, where states routinely face the same tension between operational secrecy and public accountability.
Let's steelman the government's position before challenging it. The strongest argument in the presidency's favor. Operational secrecy during an active hostage crisis is not obstruction, it's standard practice. Disclosing negotiation details in real time can get hostages killed. Commissioner Oyelade's refusal to discuss strategy while captives remained in danger was on its face a responsible position, not a cover-up. Judging the information gap by post-release standards without accounting for what disclosure would have meant during the 56 days of active danger risks unfairly criticizing a genuinely difficult operational core. The most common misconception circulating online right now is the inverse error. Some corners of social media are treating Principal Alamu's captivity video denial as absolute, verified proof that no ransom was ever discussed or paid. That overstates what we actually know. Her statement was recorded while she remained a hostage under the abductor's direct watch, which means it carries its own credibility question. She may have been speaking under duress, or the kidnappers themselves may have wanted that specific denial made public for reasons of their own. Her account deserves serious weight because she is the person with the most direct knowledge, but serious weight is not the same as settled fact, and NID isn't going to tell you it's settled when it isn't. The nuance being lost in the noise is this isn't a binary between the government lied and the government is fully honest. It's a case where operational secrecy during the crisis has now curdled into unresolved ambiguity after the crisis ended, and only continued institutional silence, not active deception, is the confirmed problem. What this means for Nigeria's democratic trajectory: accountability doesn't end when a crisis resolves happily. A government that wants public trust needs to close information gaps once the operational justification for secrecy expires, and right now, that step hasn't happened. 3 things to watch in the coming weeks. First, whether the DSS or Presidency releases any formal account of the operation, as Onanuga hinted they would. If a detailed account addresses the ransom contradiction directly, that's meaningful de-escalation of the information gap. If weeks pass with silence, that itself becomes part of the story. Second, the prosecution status of Mahmoud Usman and Abubakar Abba. Continued visible prosecution supports the no quid pro quo claim. Any quiet plea deal, transfer, or delay would suggest otherwise. Third, watch whether Principal Alamu or other released victims speak publicly outside captivity conditions about the actual demands and how the resolution was reached. A free, uncoerced account from her would be the single most important piece of evidence, either confirming or overturning her earlier captivity video statement. If the current trajectory holds, silence from the Presidency on specifics, continued prosecution of the commanders, no further victim testimony, this fades from public attention within weeks, as most Nigerian news cycles do, and the ransom question goes permanently unanswered. That itself is a notable outcome. It would mean the 56-day crisis ends without full public accountability, setting a template other future negotiations may quietly follow. Over a 3-year horizon, how this case is remembered,
clean rescue or unresolved concession, will shape how much political capital security wins like this one can generate heading into 2027 and how much scrutiny the public applies to the next one. So, back to the question we opened with. If the ransom demand wasn't real, who built that story and why did it stand for a month? Here's the honest, evidence-based answer. We don't fully know yet, and neither does the Nigerian public, because the one person positioned to resolve it spoke from inside captivity where her own safety may have shaped what she could say. What we do know is that the government has not closed that gap since her release, and a story this significant deserves better than permanent ambiguity. I'm not telling you what to believe here. I'm telling you what's confirmed, what's disputed, and what's still missing. Push back on this analysis in the comments if you see it differently. Tell me what you think actually happened in that forest. And here's the thread I'm leaving open for next time. What happens to Mahmoud Usman and Abubakar Abbas' prosecution in the coming months will tell us more about what really happened here than anything said this week. We'll be watching it. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.